The confrontation between the United States and Iran is no longer just another Middle East crisis. It is becoming a direct test of American military power, the survival strategy of Iran, the security of the Gulf states, and the stability of the global economy itself. At first glance, this may look like a familiar story. American airstrikes, Iranian retaliation, oil prices rising, Gulf allies on edge, and world leaders calling for restraint. But beneath the surface, this conflict is far more dangerous than a simple exchange of missiles and drones. Because Iran does not appear to be fighting the kind of war Washington is best prepared to win. The United States is built for overwhelming force. It can deploy aircraft carriers, stealth bombers, cruise missiles, advanced intelligence systems, and long-range strike platforms almost anywhere in the world. In a short, high-intensity campaign, American firepower is still unmatched. But Iran is not trying to beat the United States in a clean, conventional battlefield fight. Iran's strategy is slower, cheaper, more patient, and much harder to contain. Tehran appears to be betting on a war of attrition, a conflict where the goal is not to destroy America's military directly, but to exhaust its resources, expose its vulnerabilities, and make the political and economic cost of escalation unbearable. That is what makes this moment so dangerous. Iran has spent decades preparing for a confrontation like this. Its leaders have studied American wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and across the wider Middle East. They have watched how Washington responds to insurgencies, proxy warfare, missile attacks, drone strikes, and public pressure at home. And over time, Iran has built a system designed specifically to survive American power. That system includes underground facilities, mobile missile launchers, drone networks, naval harassment tactics, cyber capabilities, and most importantly, a wide regional proxy network. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and Hamas in Gaza have all played roles in Iran's wider strategic architecture. This network gives Iran something the United States struggles to manage: pressure from multiple directions at once. If Washington strikes Iran, American bases in Iraq can come under threat. Gulf energy infrastructure can become vulnerable, Israel can face missile fire, shipping in the Red Sea, and the Strait of Hormuz can be disrupted. U.S. forces can be forced to defend not just one front, but an entire region. That is the real Iranian strategy, not one battlefield, many pressure points, and the most important pressure point is the Gulf. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait are not just American partners. They are pillars of the energy system, the dollar system, and the investment flows that connect the Middle East to Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and global finance. These countries may appear wealthy and stable from the outside. They have skyscrapers, advanced airports, massive sovereign wealth funds, and some of the most important energy infrastructure on the planet. But they also have a major vulnerability. They depend on complex systems that are difficult to protect completely. Ports, oil terminals, pipelines, power grids, water desalination plants, data centers, air bases, shipping lanes, food imports. In a peaceful environment, these systems make the Gulf one of the most important economic hubs in the world. In a war environment, they become high-value targets. This is where Iran's strategy becomes especially threatening. Tehran does not need to invade Saudi Arabia or defeat the UAE in a traditional war. It only needs to make the region feel unsafe enough that investors, insurers, shipping companies, and governments begin to panic. A single drone strike on a major oil facility can shake energy markets. A missile near a port can disrupt shipping schedules. Threat to desalination plants can create fear about water security. A disruption in the Strait of Hormuz can send oil prices surging. And an attack on data infrastructure can make global technology companies rethink their future investments in the region. This is why the Gulf is not just a battlefield, it is the economic heart of the crisis. The Strait of Hormuz is especially critical. It is one of the most important maritime choke points in the world. A huge share of global oil and liquefied natural gas passes through this narrow waterway. If Iran can even partially threaten that route, the impact would not stay in the Middle East. It would hit Asia, it would hit Europe, it would hit American consumers, it would hit global inflation, it would hit shipping insurance, it would hit energy markets, and it would hit political leaders who suddenly have to explain why gasoline prices, electricity costs, and supply chains are under pressure again. That is the leverage Iran is trying to create. The United States can bomb Iranian military targets, but Iran can threaten the systems that keep the Gulf economy alive. That does not mean Iran is stronger than America. It means Iran understands where America's partners are fragile. This is the difference between power and vulnerability. America has more power, Iran may have more ways to create vulnerability, and in a long war, vulnerability matters. One of the clearest examples is the imbalance in military costs. The United States and its allies often rely on advanced interceptors to shoot down incoming drones and missiles. These systems are highly sophisticated, but they are also extremely expensive. Iran, on the other hand, can launch cheaper drones, rockets, and missiles in large numbers. Even when those weapons are intercepted, they still force the United States and its allies to spend money, use up stockpiles, and keep defenses constantly active. This creates a brutal calculation. If Iran launches a drone that costs tens of thousands of dollars, and the US or its allies use an interceptor costing hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars, then Iran does not need every drone to hit its target. It only needs to keep the pressure going long enough to drain defensive systems. That is the mathematics of attrition, and it is one of the most uncomfortable problems facing Washington right now. The American military remains the most powerful military in the world, but it was not built for endless low-cost saturation warfare across multiple regions at the same time. It was built around technological superiority, precision strike, air dominance, and high-end platforms. That model works extremely well in many scenarios, but it becomes strained when the opponent uses cheaper systems, dispersed networks, and long timelines. This is why the issue of munitions is so serious. Every interceptor fired in the Middle East is one less available somewhere else until it is replaced. Every missile used in a campaign against Iran reduces stockpiles that may also be needed for deterrence in Asia, Europe, or the Pacific, and that creates a global problem for the United States. Because Washington is not only watching Iran, it is also watching China, it is also watching Russia, it is also watching North Korea, it is also trying to reassure NATO, protect Taiwan, support allies in Asia, and maintain freedom of navigation in critical waters. So if a war with Iran begins consuming too many American resources, the strategic consequences could spread far beyond the Middle East. This is exactly the kind of pressure that adversaries of the United States would be watching closely. China would be watching how quickly American stockpiles are depleted. Russia would be watching how much political attention Washington has left. North Korea would be watching whether US deterrence looks stretched. And other countries would be watching whether American promises still carry the same weight in a world where one regional conflict can absorb so much military and political energy. This is why the Iran conflict is not just about Iran. It is about whether the United States can still manage multiple crises at once. That question becomes even more serious when the possibility of regime change enters the conversation. If the US objective is limited, destroy certain missile sites, protect bases, defend shipping lanes, and force Iran to de-escalate, then air power may be enough for a temporary campaign. But if the goal becomes regime change, then the entire situation changes. History has shown that regime change from the air is extremely difficult. Bombing can damage infrastructure, it can weaken command systems, it can destroy military assets, but removing a government usually requires political collapse, internal rebellion, or ground forces. And Iran is not an easy country to invade. It has a large population, difficult terrain, hardened military facilities, and a political system that has spent decades preparing for external threats. Any ground campaign would be costly, unpredictable, and potentially catastrophic. This is why even the discussion of ground troops is so dangerous. Once a war begins, leaders often insist that escalation is not the plan. They say the mission is limited. They say there will be no invasion. They say the strikes are defensive. They say the objective is to restore deterrence, but wars have their own momentum. If Iran keeps retaliating, Washington may feel pressure to hit harder. If Gulf allies suffer damage, they may demand stronger protection. If Israel faces sustained attacks, it may push for deeper American involvement. If American troops are killed, domestic pressure in the US could shift overnight. And if the first phase of airstrikes fails to produce the desired result, the argument for escalation grows louder. That is how limited wars become open-ended wars. Not because anyone admits at the beginning that they want a long conflict, but because each side takes one more step, then another, until the exit becomes harder to find. For the United States, this is the central danger. Washington may believe it can control the escalation ladder. It may believe it can strike Iran hard enough to force restraint, but not so hard that the war spreads. It may believe it can reassure allies, protect shipping lanes, defend bases, and avoid a broader collapse. But Iran's strategy appears designed to challenge exactly that assumption. Tehran knows that America has more firepower, so it may try to make every American move create a new burden. If the US strikes missile sites, Iran can activate proxies. If the US protects Gulf bases, Iran can threaten oil infrastructure. If the US escorts tankers, Iran can raise the cost of naval operations. If the US expands airstrikes, Iran can widen the geographic scope of retaliation. If the US threatens regime change, Iran can frame the war as a national survival struggle. This is not a war Iran needs to win quickly, it is a war Iran needs to survive, and that is a very different kind of conflict. Survival is one of Iran's strongest strategic instincts. The Islamic Republic has endured sanctions, assassinations, sabotage, internal unrest, regional wars, and decades of isolation. Its leaders understand that they cannot match the United States weapon for weapon. But they also understand that American patience has limits. The US public is tired of Middle East wars. The memory of Iraq and Afghanistan still shapes American politics. Voters may support defending troops or allies, but a major ground war with Iran would be deeply controversial. And if the conflict begins driving up oil prices, increasing inflation, damaging markets, or pulling attention away from domestic problems, public support could weaken quickly. Iran knows this. That is why a long war favors the side that can tolerate pain longer. It's not necessarily the side with the most advanced weapons. The Gulf states also face a difficult position. Publicly, they may call for calm and stability. Privately, they fear Iran's power and influence. Saudi Arabia has long viewed Iran as a strategic rival. The UAE has its own concerns about security and economic vulnerability. Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait all depend heavily on American protection. But these countries also know that open war with Iran could threaten their own survival model. Their economies depend on confidence, they depend on foreign workers, they depend on shipping, they depend on tourism, they depend on investment, they depend on the idea that the Gulf is safe, modern, and open for business. A prolonged war undermines that image. This is especially important for Saudi Arabia. Riyadh has spent years trying to diversify its economy away from oil. It has invested heavily in tourism, entertainment, sports, gaming, futuristic cities, and massive development projects. The goal has been to present Saudi Arabia as a new global hub for investment and culture. But that vision depends on stability. Investors do not pour billions into a region where missiles are flying. Tourists do not rush into a country under threat. Technology companies do not build massive data centers if power, water, and security are uncertain. So even if Gulf leaders support pressure on Iran, they also fear the consequences of a war that becomes uncontrollable. That creates a complicated situation for Washington. The United States is expected to defend its Gulf partners. But the more it defends them, the deeper it gets pulled into the conflict. And the deeper it gets pulled in, the more Iran can portray the war as America fighting on behalf of regional rivals. This is the trap. The US wants to show strength. Iran wants to make strength expensive. The Gulf wants protection, but protection increases the number of targets America must defend. And every additional target creates another opportunity for Iran to stretch the conflict. The economic dimension may be even more important than the military one. For decades, the Gulf has been central to the global energy system and the US dollar's role in world trade. Oil revenues from the region have often flowed back into American assets, financial markets, weapons purchases, infrastructure deals, and technology investments. This system has helped support American influence, but if the Gulf becomes unstable, the financial logic begins to change. Sovereign wealth funds may become more cautious, energy revenues may be disrupted, insurance costs may rise, shipping delays may multiply, foreign companies may slow investment, oil prices may become more volatile, and if global markets begin to fear a wider regional war, the shock could spread quickly. That is why this conflict is not only about missiles and bases. It is also about confidence. Modern economies run on confidence. Investors need to believe that supply chains will function. Energy buyers need to believe that oil and gas will keep flowing. Governments need to believe that allies can protect critical infrastructure. Markets need to believe that crises can be contained. Iran's strategy appears aimed at attacking that confidence. Not necessarily by destroying everything, but by making everyone ask, what if the system is more fragile than we thought? What if the Gulf cannot be fully protected? What if American deterrence no longer works the way it used to? What if cheap drones can threaten billion-dollar infrastructure? What if one regional war can expose weaknesses in the entire global order? These are the questions now hanging over Washington. And this is why the conflict has the potential to reshape perceptions of American power. For years, U.S. dominance rested not only on military capability, but on the belief that American power could impose order. Allies believed America could protect them, rivals believed America could punish them, markets believed America could keep global trade routes open. But if Iran can sustain pressure, disrupt the Gulf, and force the United States into a costly defensive posture, that belief may begin to weaken. Perception matters in geopolitics. If allies believe America is stretched, they hedge. If rivals believe America is vulnerable, they test. If markets believe the U.S. cannot control escalation, they react. And if the war drags on without a clear victory, the image of American invincibility takes damage. This does not mean the United States is destined to lose. America still has enormous advantages: global bases, advanced aircraft, intelligence networks, naval power, economic leverage, and alliances. Iran cannot match those assets directly, but the question is not whether America can strike Iran. Of course it can. The question is whether America can force Iran to accept defeat without paying a price so high that the victory no longer looks like victory. That is the hard part, because Iran's battlefield is not limited to Iranian territory. Iran's battlefield is the Gulf economy, the shipping lanes, the oil markets, the regional alliances, the proxy networks, the American political system, the defense stockpiles, the patience of voters, the confidence of investors. This is a broader kind of war one where the strongest military does not automatically control the outcome. And that is what makes the next phase so critical. If Washington can contain the fighting, protect its bases, reassure Gulf allies, keep Hormuz open, and avoid a ground war, then the crisis may remain dangerous but manageable. But if Iran continues to escalate through indirect attacks, infrastructure threats, maritime pressure, proxy operations, the conflict could enter a much more unstable phase. The worst case scenario would be a chain reaction. A drone hits a critical Gulf facility, oil prices spike, the U.S. retaliates, Iran expands attacks, a U.S. base takes casualties. Israel escalates, shipping companies avoid the region, Gulf states demand stronger action. Washington deploys more forces, Iran frames the war as existential, and suddenly what began as limited strikes becomes a regional war with global consequences. That is the nightmare scenario policymakers are trying to avoid. But avoiding it requires more than military power. It requires discipline, clear objectives, credible diplomacy, and an understanding that escalation can move faster than political leaders expect. At this point, the key question is not whether the United States is powerful. The key question is whether that power can still produce the outcome Washington wants in a region where every military move carries economic consequences. Iran is betting that it cannot. Iran is betting that the United States will eventually face a choice between escalation and exhaustion. Escalation could mean a deeper war, perhaps even ground involvement with all the risks that come with it. Exhaustion could mean accepting that Iran cannot be easily forced into submission without destabilizing the entire Gulf. Neither option is attractive, and that is exactly why this crisis matters. This is not just another chapter in the long history of U.S.-Iran tensions. It may become a defining moment in the struggle over the future of the Middle East, the credibility of American power, and the direction of the global order. If Iran survives the pressure and continues to threaten the systems America is trying to protect, the message to the world will be clear: the United States can still destroy targets, but it may no longer be able to control the consequences. And in geopolitics, that difference is everything. The coming weeks may determine whether this conflict remains contained or whether it becomes the war that exposes just how fragile the modern global system really is.